30 years ago, a game released that would define childhoods across the world. Super Mario RPG, or as it was called in the US, Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. Since then, Mario has had many RPG adventures, but this one started them all, and honestly, none of them have done it quite like this. This game is one of the crown jewels of the golden era of JRPGs. It can't be understated how impactful this game was, not just on the Mario franchise, but on the entire genre of JRPGs as a whole, for starting something different. This is my love letter to my favorite video game of all time on its 30th birthday. Let's talk about Super Mario RPG, the impact that it had on the genre, and how it changed Super Mario forever. I'm Solace, this is Solace and Dread. We produce nuanced discussions and analytical content on gaming. If that's your jam, consider subscribing. To understand why this game still matters 30 years later, we need to go back to 1994, when development began on a project that would drop Mario into a world he had never touched before. In the mid-90s, Squaresoft was one of the most prominent RPG developers in the world. They had already defined the genre with the Final Fantasy series, and their games were known for deep systems, long stories, and complex mechanics. If you played a JRPG in the early 90s, there was a good chance that Squaresoft had something to do with it. Meanwhile, Nintendo had something just as powerful: Mario. Already one of the most recognizable characters on the planet. By that point, Mario had already become the face of video games. Platformers like Super Mario Bros. And Mario World had already begun to define entire generations of gaming. But despite Mario appearing in everything from racing games to digital painting to even teaching typing, there was one genre he had never stepped into before: RPGs. The idea was simple, and it was bold. Combined Squaresoft's RPG expertise with Nintendo's approachable character. The result was something entirely new for all of us. In Nintendo, they wanted an RPG that new players could understand immediately. Traditional RPGs, well, they can be a little intimidating at times. Long, complicated menus and systems, and dozens of mechanics layered on top of each other. Super Mario RPG was designed differently. The systems are streamlined. They stripped all that down, and the progression is easy to grasp. The game constantly teaches players how its mechanics work through natural gameplay, and it slowly builds naturally. And it gets a little repetitive at times, but that repetition teaches players the rhythm of the game. Battles, they're easy to understand. Exploration feels familiar to anybody that's ever played a Mario game, and that tone of the story stayed light and humorous throughout the entire game. That collaboration between Nintendo and Square shaped everything about this game, from the structure of the combat, to the writing, to the way the world itself felt. And obviously you can see Nintendo's influence everywhere in the design philosophy. The game is colorful and full of personality. Characters, they're animated constantly, the environments feel lively, and humor is woven into almost every interaction. Gameplay always came first, keeping Mario feeling like a platformer, even within the game's 2.5D isometric perspective. And at the same time, Squaresoft's DNA was just as visible. The game had party members, turn-based battles, special abilities, status effects, and a full RPG progression system. It still feels like a legitimate RPG, it's just one that welcomes players instead of overwhelming them. This collaboration between the two companies brought something incredibly rare at the time, which was a game that genuinely blended two completely different design philosophies into one cohesive experience. A Mario adventure built like a JRPG, but designed so almost anyone could pick it up and understand it. And it wasn't just Mario being slapped on the cover of an RPG. It was the two giants of the industry combining their greatest strengths to create something entirely new. Nintendo brought the platforming and the charm and the accessibility, but Squaresoft was the rock with that RPG foundation. And for a lot of players in the 90s, this game didn't just introduce Mario to them in a new way. It introduced RPGs entirely. myself included. And it was a Mario story unlike anything that we had ever seen before. At first, Super Mario RPG feels like it's about to tell the same familiar story that we all knew. Bowser has kidnapped the princess, and Mario rushes to the keep, and everything feels exactly like the setup that we'd seen many times before. But within the first few minutes, the game completely blows that formula to bits. Right in the middle of Mario's battle with Bowser, a massive sword crashes down from the sky, smashing into Bowser's Keep and scattering everybody in different directions. That sword belongs to Smithy, a mysterious mechanical invader from another dimension. And in that single moment, the game establishes that this is not your normal Mario story. The scope and scale of this adventure was going to be beyond anything we had ever seen. The threat was well beyond the likes of Bowser and Wart. And that sword that crashed into the keep, it also shattered the Star Road, the place that grants wishes across the Mushroom Kingdom. And the fragments of that road would scatter across the world as the 7 star pieces, and recovering them would quickly become Mario's new primary mission. But this time, Mario's not taking on his adventure alone. Along the way, he meets a cast of characters that would go on to be some of the most beloved one-off characters in Mario history. First, there is the magnificent Mallow, a crybaby, cloud-like creature who believes he's just an ordinary tadpole. Mallow is emotional, and he's far more sensitive than what we're used to seeing in this world. And this story eventually leads the party to Nimbus Land, where he learns the truth about who he really is. And then, of course, there's Geno, who is easily the most iconic of the characters in this game, at least the new ones. Geno is actually a celestial spirit sent from Star Road, possessing a wooden doll in order to help recover the star pieces and restore balance to the world. The party eventually even includes Bowser, who reluctantly allows you to join the Koopa Troop. So you're actually letting him join your party. And Bowser's inclusion is probably the most notable here, because for many of us, it was the first time we'd seen a threat that's such a formidable force that longtime enemies had to band together to stop it. Even now, I'm a sucker for this archetype, and it's all because of Mario RPG. And then even Princess Peach became a playable party member, and that's something that was incredibly rare for Mario games at the time. And together, this plucky group travels across a surprisingly strange and vast version of the Mushroom Kingdom. Towers filled with bizarre characters like Booster, mining towns populated entirely by suspiciously black-coated moles, floating cloud kingdoms hiding royal secrets, and eventually it ends at the mechanical weapon world where Smithy is forging an army to invade Mario's reality. The tone constantly balances humor with sincerity, and the characters, they all exaggerate through their emotions through animation, dialogue is playful and self-aware, and the feel of this game is something that was completely new at the time. And that's what made the world of Super Mario RPG so memorable. It took the familiar foundation of the Mushroom Kingdom and let Square's imagination just run wild with it. The result was a Mario adventure that felt both recognizable and completely surreal at the same time. And that strange, charming world was only half of what made the game so special, because the other half is the way you played it. That was so innovative, and it's what still finds itself in games today. At its core, the game uses a traditional turn-based combat system. Characters take turns attacking, using special abilities, or using items just like many RPGs of the era. If you'll allow me a small tangential rant for a second, I love that the party members all kind of align with traditional Final Fantasy classes. Mario is a bona fide dragoon, Mallow is a black mage, Geno is a red mage, Bowser is a warrior, Peach is a white mage. They never actually acknowledge this in the game, but it's obvious if you've ever played a Final Fantasy, and it's a fun tidbit. But anyway, what made Super Mario RPG feel different was the inclusion of timed hits, a mechanic that made battles far more interactive than other turn-based games at the time. When you attack, pressing the button at the right moment increased your damage, and when you're defending from physical attacks, timing a button press could reduce the damage that you received. It meant that even during turn-based combat, players were constantly engaged instead of simply selecting a command and waiting for the animation to finish. That small change gave battles a rhythm that felt closer to an action game while keeping the strategic structure of an RPG. And the influence of that system would ripple outwards for decades. Later Mario RPG series like Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi would build entire combat systems around interactive timing mechanics, turning what started as a small feature in Super Mario RPG into a defining part of the franchise's identity. Even outside of Mario, other RPGs experimented with ways to keep turn-based combat active. And you can even think of games on the PlayStation like Legend of Dragoon, which built its entire attack system around timed button presses called additions. And you can still see that even today in games as new as Expedition 33. But combat wasn't the only place where the game blended genres. Exploration also felt different from most RPGs at the time. Instead of that top-down map like most classic RPGs, Super Mario had that isometric perspective, creating a world that almost felt like a three-dimensional Mario level, viewed at an angle. This also allowed the developers to sneak in small platforming challenges, jumping across moving platforms, avoiding enemies, and hunting for hidden treasure chests tucked into the environment. It kept the game feeling like a Mario adventure even while players are leveling up and managing party members and gear. And on top of that, the game constantly broke up the RPG structure with minigames and scripted moments that felt more like classic Nintendo design. There was minecart rides, rhythm-style challenges, puzzle sequences, and even timed obstacle courses, and they were scattered all over the world. These moments prevented the game from feeling too slow or menu-heavy, reinforcing the idea that this was still a Mario game first and an RPG second. A gameplay loop that felt completely unique at the time, part platformer, part RPG. And that blend of systems is a big reason why Super Mario RPG still feels surprisingly fresh decades later, because it never fully commits to just one genre. It instead constantly shifts between them, keeping players engaged in a way that many traditional RPGs of that era simply did not. By the time Super Mario RPG finally released in 1996, the gaming world was already moving into the next generation. Mario 64 in full 3D worlds and a new era of hardware. And under normal circumstances, yeah, a late Super Nintendo release could have easily slipped under the radar. But Super Mario RPG avoided that fate. Word of mouth spread quickly. Players discovered it through rentals and recommendations and schoolyard conversations, and over time that game built a reputation as one of the standout titles of the Super Nintendo's final years. And more importantly, its ideas didn't stop with that one game. And even though Nintendo and Square would eventually stop playing nice in the sandbox, the success of Super Mario RPG showed that Mario could exist comfortably inside an RPG structure. That foundation would eventually grow into an entire branch of the Mario franchise. In 2000, on the 64, Nintendo released Paper Mario, and that game was what many had called the spiritual successor, and that carried forward many of the same ideas: a turn-based combat, a humorous story, and most importantly, interactive action commands that evolved directly from the time hits introduced in Super Mario RPG. And then a few years later, another series emerged with Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, and that was on the Game Boy Advance. And this pushed this concept even further by making every attack, dodge, and special ability dependent on player timing and input. Now, these games expanded on the formula in their own way, but the DNA was unmistakable. The humor, the character-driven storytelling, the party-based adventure, and the interactive combat all trace their lineage back to that first experiment on the Super Nintendo. Today, the Mario RPG family includes many titles, Paper Mario titles, and several Mario and Luigi games, and they're each interpreting this formula in different ways, but they're all carrying forward those first ideas that came from Super Mario RPG. And that's part of what makes the original game, and looking back on it, so fascinating. But even as Mario RPGs continued through new series and new generations of hardware, Super Mario RPG itself remained weirdly isolated. Because the original game was developed with Squaresoft, its characters and world existed in this kind of limbo after the companies went their separate ways. For years, a lot of us wondered if the games would ever be revisited in any meaningful way. And during that time, something interesting happened. The game's reputation only continued to grow. Players like me who had experienced it on the Super Nintendo remembered it with an unusual level of affection.
This is Solace's favorite game of all time.
Hell, Gino was consistently one of the most requested characters for the Smash Bros. Roster year after year. And despite only appearing in one single game, fans spent decades asking Nintendo to bring him back in some form, and every small cameo or reference sparked excitement across the community, which is crazy because Mallow's a better character, but don't even get me started on that. For a long time though, the only ways to revisit the game was playing on the original hardware or re-releases on the Wii Virtual Console or on the Super Nintendo Classic, and that helped introduce it to new audiences, but never quite delivered the full revival that a lot of us had hoped for. And that made the announcement of the Super Mario RPG remake in 2023 feel surreal. Nearly 30 years after the original release, Nintendo finally brought the game back with modern visuals, but they kept the core design almost completely intact. The remake preserved that isometric perspective, the timed hit combat system, the humor, and the charm that made the original so memorable, while updating the presentation in a way that felt faithful. And the response showed just how much love for the game had been building over these decades. Longtime fans were finally able to revisit one of the most beloved RPGs of the 90s, while an entirely new generation got to experience the game that started Mario's RPG legacy. After nearly 3 decades of waiting, Super Mario RPG wasn't just remembered, it was celebrated all over again. So here we are, 30 years later. Super Mario RPG still stands as one of the most unique experiments Nintendo has ever attempted for Mario. It showed that Mario can step outside of platforming and still feel completely at home. It introduced countless players to the world of RPGs for the very first time, and it laid the foundation for an entire branch of the Mario franchise that would continue for decades. The ideas that were born there lived on through Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi and countless other RPGs that borrowed from that interactive combat. But even with all of those descendants, there's still something special about the original. The unforgettable characters, the humor, the music, and the satisfying joy of landing a perfectly timed hit. It all comes together in a way that still feels charming even today. For many of us, it was the game that showed how those two worlds could come together and create something truly special. And for me, it remains my favorite video game of all time. 30 years later, Super Mario RPG isn't just a relic of the Super Nintendo era, it's a reminder of how creative the industry can be when two different ideas collide. Happy birthday, Super Mario RPG. That's it from me. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. And long live the Turtle Kingdom.